All right, so get this. We've got a whole bunch of articles about Iraqi immigration to Sweden. And wow, I'm already fascinated. We're going to be focusing mostly on excerpts from the Wikipedia article on Swedish Iraqis.
Okay.
This deep dive is all about understanding how this community came to be such a big part of Swedish society.
Yeah.
And we'll touch on things like immigration patterns and demographics and, cultural diversity in Sweden.
Yeah, what's really striking is just the size of this community.
Yeah.
We're talking about 145,586 individuals who were born in Iraq,
Wow.
plus another 91,119 with at least one Iraqi parent.
Wow.
And that makes them the second largest minority group in Sweden, right after Syrians.
I had no idea it was that significant.
A lot of people.
That's a huge number of people. And the Wikipedia article says that a big chunk of that growth happened between 2002 and 2009.
Yeah.
Makes sense, considering what was going on in Iraq during that time.
Absolutely. The Iraq War had a massive impact on global migration patterns. And Sweden's policy of offering refuge played a major role in shaping this community.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that Iraqi immigration to Sweden didn't just start in the 2000s.
Okay.
It's actually a story that goes back decades,
Right.
with these distinct waves of migration.
Okay, so it's not just one simple story. Let's break down those waves. What can you tell us about them?
Well, the first wave started back in 1968
Mm-hmm.
and lasted until about 1978.
Okay.
During this time, you had roughly 8,000 people fleeing the Ba'athist regime.
Wow.
These were largely Kurdish and Assyrian nationalists who were facing persecution,
Right.
and also Iraqi communists who opposed the government's ideology.
It's interesting to think about what it must have been like for those early immigrants,
Yeah,
arriving in a country so different from their own,
absolutely.
often with limited language skills,
Yeah.
facing this whole new culture.
Absolutely. And it's something that connects to all the different waves.
Mhm.
Each group brought their own experiences and perspectives, adding to the diversity of the Iraqi community in Sweden.
Okay, so what about the second wave?
Yeah.
When did that happen, and who were the people arriving then?
The second wave came in the 1980s, specifically from 1980 to 1988.
Okay.
This time it was about 10,000 people, primarily Kurds and Assyrians, escaping the horrors of the Al-Anfal campaign.
Now, for those of us who might not be familiar with that, what exactly was the Al-Anfal campaign?
It was a truly horrific period in Iraqi history.
Yeah.
Essentially, it was a systematic campaign of genocide waged by Saddam Hussein's regime against the Kurdish population in northern Iraq.
Oh, wow.
Thousands were killed, villages were destroyed,
Wow.
and it left lasting scars on the Kurdish community.
That's just awful. So many of those arriving in Sweden during that time were fleeing unimaginable violence and trauma.
Yeah,
And on top of that, the article mentions men trying to avoid being drafted into the Iran-Iraq War.
exactly.
It was a time of just immense hardship for so many.
Exactly. And that context is really important to understanding the diversity within the Iraqi community in Sweden.
Yeah.
You have different groups fleeing different situations at different times.
Right.
It's not a monolithic story.
Right. All right, so 2 waves down, 2 more to go. What about the third wave?
The third wave came in the 1990s, from 1991 to 1999.
Okay.
This wave saw around 15,000 people, again, mostly Kurds and Assyrians coming from northern Iraq, often with their families.
It seems like this wave was less about fleeing immediate violence and more about seeking a stable future for themselves and their children.
You could say that they were looking for a place where they could rebuild their lives and raise their families in peace,
Right.
free from the political turmoil that had plagued their homeland for so long.
And finally, the fourth wave, which the article says was the largest. What drove that surge in immigration?
Unsurprisingly, the fourth wave was directly tied to the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the ensuing conflict.
Right.
This wave, lasting from 2003 to 2010, saw approximately 30,000 people arrive.
Wow.
And this time it was primarily Sunni Arabs and Assyrian Christians seeking refuge from the escalating violence and instability.
So you have these 4 distinct waves, each bringing a unique piece of the puzzle to the Swedish-Iraqi community.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the article also mentions Sweden being home to Europe's largest community of Iraqi Mandaeans.
Oh, that's fascinating, isn't it? The Mandaeans are a religious group with ancient roots,
Okay.
often considered to be the last surviving Gnostics.
Wow.
Their presence in Sweden adds another layer to the cultural and religious tapestry of the Iraqi community.
Okay, so we've got the numbers, we've got the history, we've got a sense of the different groups that make up this community.
Yeah.
But what happened when they arrived?
Right.
I mean, what was the process like for these Iraqi immigrants trying to build a new life in Sweden?
That's a great question. And it leads us to the heart of the matter refugee status and integration.
Okay.
And let me tell you, this is where things get really interesting.
All right, lay it on me. What were the challenges and successes they faced? How did Sweden respond to this influx of people seeking refuge?
Well, one fact that jumps out is that in 2006 alone, Sweden granted more protection to Iraqis than all other EU countries combined.
Whoa, seriously. That's a pretty bold statement about Sweden's approach to refugees.
Yeah.
But how did they handle it? Did the system just adapt overnight?
Not quite. It wasn't always smooth sailing.
Oh.
In 2005, the initial recognition rate for Iraqis seeking refugee status was incredibly low, only 0.1%.
Wait, so almost no one was being granted asylum?
Right.
But you said Sweden took in more Iraqis than anyone else in Europe that year.
Yeah.
How does that add up?
Here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
While the official refugee status recognition was low, the overall protection rate, including something called complementary protection, was actually 24%.
Okay.
And then in 2006, the Swedish Migration Board made a pivotal decision.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What was the decision?
They decided to grant permanent residency to most Iraqis who had arrived,
Wow.
even those who were initially rejected for refugee status.
So they basically said, look, we know the situation in Iraq is dire, and we're going to give you a chance to build a life here.
Yeah,
That's a huge shift in policy.
absolutely. And it had a massive impact. It meant that these Iraqi families could finally put down roots,
Right.
integrate into Swedish society, and contribute to their new home.
I bet that decision sent ripples through the system. Did it cause any problems?
Well, it certainly put a strain on resources.
Yeah.
Applications for residency skyrocketed from 2,330 in 2005 to almost 9,000 in 2006.
Wow.
Municipalities, especially places like Malmö and Södertälje, were struggling to accommodate this huge influx of people.
I can only imagine. What was it like for those communities trying to manage such a sudden increase in population?
It was a challenging time for everyone involved.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a story about the mayor of Södertälje describing the situation as being on the verge of collapse.
Wow, on the verge of collapse. What were the main issues they were facing?
Well, housing was a major problem.
Okay.
There just wasn't enough affordable housing available for everyone.
Right.
Schools and healthcare systems were also feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
And there were concerns about social integration and ensuring that these new arrivals had access to the support they needed.
So on the one hand, you have Sweden opening its doors and offering a safe haven to thousands of Iraqis fleeing a war-torn country.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have the very real challenges of accommodating and integrating such a large number of people into a new society.
Yeah.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of understanding both the humanitarian aspect of welcoming refugees
Yeah.
and the practical realities of integration.
So we've covered the history of Iraqi immigration to Sweden.
Right.
And we've talked about the challenges of seeking refuge and building a new life in a different country.
Yeah.
But what about the individuals who make up this community?
Ah, yes. That's the part I love the most. Let's move beyond the numbers and statistics and put
Yeah.
faces to the names. Let's talk about some of the notable Swedish Iraqis who've made their mark on Swedish society.
All right. I'm ready to be inspired. Who should we start with?
Well, the Wikipedia article mentions quite a few. There's Amar Sher, a talented footballer making waves in the sports world.
Yep.
Yeah, he's one to watch for sure. And then there's Darren the singer. His music has really resonated with Swedish audiences.
I've heard a couple of his songs are pretty catchy.
Yeah.
It's cool to see how these people are using their platform and their talents to kind of bridge cultures and connect with people.
Yeah.
So what other notable figures are mentioned in the article?
Well, there's Hilaf Ali, a journalist and author, and her work kind of offers a unique perspective on the Iraqi-Swedish experience.
You know, it's interesting to see how Swedish Iraqis are contributing to so many different fields.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not just athletes and singers, they're journalists, politicians, academics, entrepreneurs. They're
Awesome.
really woven into the fabric of Swedish society.
Absolutely. And that's a testament to both the resilience of the Iraqi community
Yeah.
and also the openness of Swedish society.
Right.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that, integration hasn't always been easy.
Yeah.
There have been challenges along the way, especially for those who arrive during times of heightened political tension or social unrest.
Right, it's not all sunshine and roses. What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, there have been instances of discrimination and prejudice,
Okay.
both from individuals and institutions.
Right.
And sometimes there's a clash of cultural values and expectations,
Right.
which can lead to misunderstandings and tensions.
It's easy to forget that integration is a two-way street.
Mhm.
It's not just about immigrants adapting to a new culture.
Right.
It's also about the host society being willing to embrace diversity
Absolutely.
and make space for new perspectives.
Exactly. It's about building bridges and finding common ground,
Right.
even when there are differences.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the story of Swedish-Iraqi so compelling.
Yeah.
It's a story of resilience, adaptation,
Right.
and this ongoing process of building a shared future.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about the history of Iraqi immigration to Sweden,
Yeah.
the challenges of seeking refuge and integration,
Right.
and the contributions of some notable individuals from this community.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what stands out to you the most from all of this information? What's the biggest takeaway for you?
For me, it's the sheer scale and diversity of the Swedish-Iraqi community.
Okay.
It's remarkable to see how they've grown from this relatively small group in the 1960s to become such a significant presence in Swedish society.
Yeah.
And it's not just about numbers.
Right.
It's about the richness of their culture,
Yeah.
their contributions to these various fields,
Right.
and their impact on the social fabric of Sweden.
I agree with you there. It's also a testament to Sweden's willingness to open its doors to those seeking refuge.
Yeah.
Even when it means, facing challenges and making adjustments.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Sweden has this long history of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers. And the story of Swedish Iraqis is a powerful example of how immigration can enrich a nation,
Yeah.
both culturally and socially.
But it's also important to remember that the story is still unfolding.
Oh, for sure.
The Iraqi community in Sweden is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And their experiences and contributions will continue to shape the country's future.
That's a great point, and it kind of leads to some interesting questions.
Yeah.
Given these 4 distinct waves of migration
Right.
and their unique characteristics, what future trends might we see in the Swedish-Iraqi community?
Right. How will they continue to influence Swedish society culturally, economically, and politically?
Right.
These are all things to consider as we move forward.
And it makes you wonder about the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, both for the Iraqi community and Sweden as a whole.
For example, how will Sweden navigate issues like social cohesion and integration in the face of, increasing diversity?
Yeah.
How will the Iraqi community maintain their cultural identity while also participating fully in Swedish society? And how will the experiences of Swedish Iraqis kind of influence Sweden's policies and attitudes towards immigration in the future?
Yeah.
These are all really complex questions with no easy answers, but they're important to think about.
Yeah.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Definitely.
There's so much more to explore and learn about the Swedish-Iraqi community and their place in Swedish society.
Yeah.
It really does feel that way. This deep dive has given us so much to think about.
It really has. And hopefully it sparked your curiosity to learn even more.
Exactly. So if you're interested in digging deeper into the world of Swedish Iraqis, we highly recommend checking out the full Wikipedia article.
Yeah.
It's a great starting point, and it's got tons of links and resources that'll keep you busy for hours.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
You can also explore some of the individuals that we mentioned,
Right.
like Amar Darin or Ilaf Ali.
Yeah.
Their stories are truly inspiring and offer a glimpse into the diverse experiences of Swedish Iraqis.
And even beyond the Wikipedia article, there's a wealth of information out there.
Yeah, you can find personal stories, documentaries, news articles, academic research, all sorts of perspectives on this topic.
So true. Don't be afraid to kind of branch out and explore those different avenues.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
Absolutely. So, to our listener, as you continue your exploration of this fascinating community, here's a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
We've talked about the 4 waves of migration, but what might a 5th wave look like?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
What factors might drive future migration from Iraq to Sweden?
Right?
And how might those newcomers shape the community's identity and trajectory?
And how will Sweden's evolving political landscape and social attitudes impact the integration process for future generations of Swedish Iraqis?
Those are all really important questions.
Yeah, these are all questions worth considering as we look ahead. The story of Swedish Iraqis is far from over,
It's not over,
and it'll be interesting to see how it continues to unfold in the years to come.
for sure.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but we hope you've enjoyed the journey.
I know I have. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
And to our listeners, happy learning. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.